This is Dear Strategy, episode 122. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, to another great episode. This is episode 122. And today we're going to feature a strategy question. This is a user-submitted question, so looking forward to that. But I'm looking forward to it even more because this is a subject that has been on my mind for quite some time and something I've been wanting to explore a little bit more deeply. So I'm glad this episode is going to give me a chance to do that. So I always do a shout out for the company that sponsors this show, the company I own and founded, Strategy Generation Company. Go visit us at strategygeneration.com if you want to learn more about the training and tools and products that we offer all around this subject of strategy creation. So again, go visit us at strategygeneration.com to learn more. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right to today's question because I'm really super excited to talk about this. And it is, Dear Strategy, how do you manage the life cycle of mature products in resistive markets? Okay, so short question, but definitely a lot of elements to it to talk about. So this obviously has to do with the life cycle curve, right? The product life cycle curve. We've talked about this before. Most product managers are familiar with this. Most business managers are familiar with this. And if you're not familiar with this, you should be, because every product in business will go through some type of a life cycle that hits these stages that we're going to talk about. So the question, of course, is how do you manage your product within that life cycle, but particularly mature products, and even more particularly in what we would consider to be resistive markets. And that's a definition that we have to talk about a little bit. Before we do that, though, I'm going to get into this concept of the life cycle curve a little bit, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page with it. So when we talk about a life cycle curve, we're talking about you put a product into the marketplace, whether it's a product, a service, an entire business, whatever it is. You put it into the marketplace and it's going to go through several different stages of market acceptance. Okay. The first stage, of course, is introduction, where people are just starting to buy the product. They're just starting to, to get used to the product. So you're starting to gain some market share. Then hopefully that moves into growth, where now you're getting a lot more growth, a lot more revenue, a lot more people wanting to buy your product. That will eventually start to level off into maturity, where the growth starts to slow. And now you start getting a leveling off of your sales, a leveling off of your market share, a leveling off of your saturation. And then that will eventually move over the curve into decline, meaning that your sales starts to decline, your share starts to decline potentially, the product acceptance starts to decline, meaning it may be replaced with something else. And then we'll pause there, because that's where a lot of life cycle curves actually end, is at the end of decline, where companies have to make some decision. Okay, so it's been declining for some period of time. What do I do with it, right? So this idea of the life cycle curve has been around a long time. There's many different sources of where it comes from. But I think the most popular one, especially among product managers, back in 1965 in Harvard Business Review, Theodore Levitt, who was a marketing professor, very strong marketing professor, very often quoted in marketing circles, and he kind of reproposed the life cycle curve, or reintroduced it. And he actually said in the beginning, a lot of people are familiar with this, but I talk to a lot of people and they're not. So here it is. And in his version of the curve, it has those four stages, right? Again, introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. And at the end of decline, or towards the end of decline, you have to decide what you want to do. And this is the version that I would say is the most popular, has been repeated over and over and over again, although many people don't cite the source, right? Most people don't cite the source. This is the one that everybody uses. And it kind of, if you look at it, it'll kind of stop literally right in the middle. It's pretty much a bell curve that has the last part of the bell just pretty much chopped off, right? And it stops right there, because the idea is you have an inflection point. You have to decide what you want to do. Now, some companies at the end of that decline will decide, stop the product right away, right? And in the consumer space, this is not terribly uncommon, where you would say, okay, the product's been declining at some period of time. At some point, I'm going to say, I'm done. and I'm leaving the market. And at that point, I guess it could kind of look like a sharp drop off, right? Because you just say one day I'm done. You could bleed off the inventory, but very quickly. And at the end of that, you're finished. Other companies will start to say, let's try and reinvent the product in some way. Let's try and, re-enhance it, put more bells and whistles, redevelop to some way so that you can start to turn that curve back upwards, right? And in that case, you could decide, do you want to consider that to be the same life cycle curve, or do you want to start a new life cycle curve because it's more or less a new product? I guess that would depend on how much you tweak the product, but you could decide to do that as well. Other companies may decide to just keep, riding the decline. If it's a very, very slow decline, then you just keep the decline and it becomes more of a cash cow. Ivory soap comes to mind with that one, right? I mean, it's probably been in decline for some period of time, but it, Procter and Gamble will continue to ride it. I'm guessing because, it's a very, very slow decline. It probably makes some good money. It probably is a low cost product. So you can continue that curve. I won't say indefinitely, but for a long period of time. So the point is there's a number of different things that you can do or decide when you get towards the end of decline. So how does all of that relate back to this question, right? Well, business to business companies, which I know is where this question comes from, they more often than not are dealing with a declining product that's been declining for a long period of time. And at some point they have to decide, do they want to exit the market and how do they want to exit the market? Right. And this is what I think this question is being asked with respect to a resistive market, meaning that the market is resistant to change, that the product is declining. It's definitely not making as much money as it was before. Maybe it's difficult to maintain. Maybe the supply chain is starting to become too expensive. Maybe, there's too much maintenance required. Whatever the case is, it's definitely at the end of its decline phase or toward the end of its decline phase, but customers are resistant to change, right? They still want to buy that version of the product. And I see this in I used to be in the utility business, right? And in the utility business, you have very long life cycle products and you have, utilities who are very hesitant to approve new technologies because it takes a long time to prove if they work in the field, right? So they want to stick to what they know. And even though those products may be really expensive for companies to produce, and those companies are not producing enough of them to make sense, those few utility customers who absolutely continue to want to buy this product, they're very important, and you need to continue to do to do what they want, right? So that's what I think is meant here by a resistive market, and this is faced by a lot of business to business companies, particularly in the heavy industrial manufacturing space, things of that nature, and particularly with long life cycle type products. So what do you do? Well, I can tell you that I was never a big fan of the version of the life cycle curve that became popularized, which is showing, at the end of decline, nothing happens, right? It's just like some big gap in the world. I always draw my life cycle curves all the way out, finish the bell curve out and put another phase at the end, which is exit, right? So my 5 phases are introduction, growth, maturity, decline, and exit. Now, I recognize that exit cycle may not be quite as long and drawn out for some companies as others, right? Some companies, it will more fall off the cliff, like is shown in more of the traditional life cycle curves. Other companies are going to be doing something to their products, tweaking their products and other things. But I think for those companies that have a longer exit cycle, it's really important to draw that last part of the curve. Why? Because there's real decisions and real strategies that you have to take in that last part of the curve that you can't ignore. If you're exiting a product over time, and in the industrial world, that might take a few years, right? Then you have to be preparing. You have to, first of all, make sure that you're using that time to prepare for whatever's going to replace that product. You're using that time to shore up the supply chain so you can continue to supply that product for however long you decide to supply it. You're using that time to inform customers that something is going to replace it. You are eventually going to let go of this product, but you want to ease them out of it. You want to give them all of the testing and all of the data and all of the comfort level that they require so that they know that, you're going to take care of them and not just drop them off the face of the planet when you decide that this product goes away. So you're easing the market out of this product. And again, that might not be the way a consumer product necessarily looks, although I have seen consumer products where that happens, right? Where they ease them out over a year or something like that. But definitely in the industrial and business to business space, that is going to be, I would say, one of the more common things you have to do. And by not drawing that part of the life cycle, you kind of get your mindset into the fact that, well, I just have to end this and then start over someday. That's one of the worst things that a company can do, especially in that space, because what will happen is they will lose those customers, right? They will lose those customers who haven't gotten themselves into a mode of replacing the product with something yet. And that's not a good thing. Equally bad is just kind of hanging on indefinitely to a product that you know is old, that you know is aged, that you know you're not going to be able to sustain over the long term, because one day then you're going to be forced to kill it in a very quick way. And that's going to make those customers that are buying it really, really upset. And you might put them in a bad situation. So that last part of the curve, again, really, really important. And back to the question, how do you manage the life cycle of those products in resistive markets? The answer is actually quite simple. Plan for the product exit, right? Plan for the exit. Even if it's a very long-term exit, plan for it. Draw that last part of the curve and make sure you put real strategies in place to be able to exit your product over a certain period of time. Communicate that to both your team and to your customers, and make sure that there is contingency plans to move those customers to other products, develop those other products that customers need. Sometimes you might even involve those customers in the development, right? Because you're completely transparent and completely upfront with the fact that you are going to exit these products over time. Even if you don't exit, by the way, again, you still have the other options of, kind of tweaking the product, reinventing the product, re-enhancing the product, or I guess you could kill it altogether. But at least you're giving yourself those options. And that's really what you want to take note of and make sure that you do when you're doing this kind of a study. Okay, so hopefully that is a helpful answer. Again, I got it off my chest because a lot of times I draw this full bell curve and it looks different than the popularly accepted view of a life cycle curve. And I always say, people are going to think that I'm crazy for drawing out the exit portion, but I'm not, because really, I think the crazy thing is when companies don't account for it. And that's really the failing. So make sure you don't do that. And also, if you're interested in this topic, make sure you go to the blog, because I'll write about this. I'll draw the life cycle curves. I'll kind of go through the different options here. And I think this will become a lot clearer when you see it in writing. So you can do that by going to dearstrategy.net. You could also, while you're there, ask a question to be featured on the show, or give us a story that you want us to analyze. You can do that by clicking the contact link on the upper right-hand corner of the website. And that will give you a link to a place where you can ask a question, give us some feedback, whatever you want to do. And while you're doing all that, please don't forget to make time for the plan. We'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.